This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Here we are, 26th of March, 2025. By the way, it's looking very spring-like outside, and it is taking every bit of self-control for me to not put off doing this program so that I can go out and walk around in the sunlight. I really needed this. I was ready for a break. I'm even willing to put up with that persistent southern Idaho wind that never really seems to stop. If I can get outside and get some sunlight, a little bit of warmth, yep, I'm more than ready. Thank you again for joining me for the program today. A couple of different things I want to talk about. I'm going to start with, I don't know if you've seen some of the fallout from the latest Snow White film, but this is a really good metaphor for just how tired people have become of the whole woke mind virus. We're going to go into some detail on that in just a few moments. But the first thing I want to point you toward is an article from Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute about the post-lockdown disorientation in the arts. Now, Snow White has been under fire for a little bit since it was announced. It was clear that, well, this isn't going to be just the regular, faithful to the original Snow White. This is a woke remake of Snow White with all the predictable woke tropes and the occasional nod for you traditionalists, and by the way, this is, an homage to the original Snow White from back in the 1930s. But I guess it doesn't help that the star, Rachel Ziegler, who has what appears to be a very nice singing voice, but has horrible personality skills, or at least social skills, has been out there thumping her chest and, I always win, and this is the best thing that ever happened, and this ain't your traditional, Snow White story. This is not a princess waiting for a prince to save her. This is a strong, girl boss out there taking charge and kicking butt and taking names. And anyway, it fell pretty flat. How flat? Flatter than a cat that's been out there on a country road for about 3 days. It's been pretty flat during harvest season, no less. So anyway, Jeffrey Tucker has, I think, a really solid take on why this movie has fallen flat. And it's not just, it's not that, because Rachel Ziegler was a little too full of hubris, and that's why everybody turned their backs on it. It's more a matter of people are just tired. They're tired of being told, you have to think this way, you have to feel this way, you have to believe this way, and if you don't, well, let the, pejorative start. You're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're a sexist, you're whatever, homophobe. So here's how Jeffrey Tucker puts it. He says, Snow White, the live-action version cobbled together by Disney, opened over the weekend with devastating reviews in empty theaters coast to coast. He says, in my community, there were no sellout crowds on opening day, and the thinning turned to 0 tickets in the final afternoon and evening of the weekend. No showings are scheduled past Wednesday. Yikes. Now, this is a town full of blue voters with lots of kids, seemingly an ideal market. Based on the reviews, though, he says the plot was incoherent, toggling between woke revision of traditional gender roles and accommodating audience expectations of the famous tropes of the film. But the final result just upsets everyone. So it seems like yet another disaster for Disney, but more than that, emblematic of a serious problem in the arts world in general, which has never really recovered from the lockdowns. He says Disney has misread the room for a very long time and seems implausibly slow to correct course. Now, one might expect market signals would be enough to shock the internal culture of an enterprise, but ideology can be more powerful than even failing profitability statements. And our times provide many such examples. Now, he also points out that the movie's release was caught between a cultural turning and got squeezed in the hinges. Seemingly out of nowhere, the 2024 election revealed a mass revolt against the sloganeering social management represented by DEI, ESG, and all the Biden-Kamala-era political fashions, all summarily repealed by Trump's executive orders 2 months before this movie hit the box office. So he says it's strange how quickly this turning took place. One day, the orthodoxy of imperious management of cultural loyalties landed on one side, and the next day, they flipped to the other. Of all the pushes by the Trump administration against what it inherited, its moves against DEI and that which was associated with it seems to have garnered the least resistance. And I love this next point that he makes here. Trump did not so much cause as reveal and permission the revolt. You understand that? People were ready to put their foot down. They just didn't really feel safe to do so. But universities, corporations, and governments have all gone along with the new push for meritocracy over DEI seemingly effortlessly. It's as if masses of people just finally said, it's over. Kind of like we did with the pandemic. Do you remember this? So the sudden lane switches left plenty of roadkill, this movie among them. And Jeffrey Tucker says it's fascinating to reflect on how this film got caught in the cultural crosshairs. Now, to understand it, we need to return to 2020 and to the lockdowns that shut not only movie theaters nationwide, but also imposed extreme restrictions on the operations of movie makers. Broadway shut down completely, as did museums and countless concert venues, only to open later with mask and vaccine mandates that kept critically minded people away. Now, he talks about how most filmmakers gave up trying to adhere to strictures during that time over masking and social distancing and decided, we're going to wait it out till regular life returns. But that 18 to 24-month period, he says, led to a serious isolation on the part of the film and arts community, as it did with everyone. When it ended, we might have expected a sigh of relief and a return to normalcy, but we got the opposite. An arts community more alienated than ever, along with distorted politics and culture too. So I'm going to let you discover the rest of this, but the idea here is that lockdowns, isolation, mass social and cultural upheaval had such a far-reaching impact on the arts that it left the most confused elements, long having existed in the underworld of disgruntled anger at the bourgeoisie, to imagine that they really could become mainstream and thereby shove all this alienation down audience throats regardless of ticket sales or collapsing revenue streams. It's like a case of, don't you know who I am? On the part of Hollywood. You have to like this. It was never more clear, he says, that something had broken than seeing the changes at the Kennedy Center. Now, he says, I've seen it a lot of times in the post-lockdown period at local theaters, museums, and symphonies, where it would seem that the management really had lost touch with all reality. The Kennedy Center with its drag shows, the Met Gala with its Hunger Games opulence, European art festivals struggling to be as offensive and tasteless as possible, and so much more. Just as an aside, I've spent a fair amount of time with my mom over the last few months, and she doesn't get a whole lot of a window on the world, but occasionally she flips on CBS because that's what the local TV affiliate is broadcasting, and it comes in, the clearest. So the Kennedy, the Kennedy Night of Honors at the Kennedy Arts Center, the Kennedy Center, in Washington, D.C. I'm telling you, it is nothing more than a giant rainbow-covered pride rally. And they have some really incredible performers. Don't get me wrong. The talent is undeniable. But everything is absolutely just soaked in LGBT propaganda. Kind of interesting. And Jeffrey Tucker says it was never more clear something had broken than when standing in gender-neutral lines for the washroom at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts Concert Hall, surrounded on all sides by seething audience members who paid up to $1,000 a ticket, just to be publicly humiliated in some grotesque biological experiment. In other words, people really weren't down with the whole, genderless bathrooms. This is what happens when you push people into something that they are not ready to accept or simply will not jive with their morals. So the reset in which we live right now, it's not the great reset of 2020. It's just the opposite. It's a desperate clamor for normalcy, merit, reality, and truth, backed by a burning passion to drive out any strains of wokeness from educational and corporate institutions. I like this observation too. Jeffrey Tucker says if only one theater had decided instead to show the 1937 version of Snow White, they likely would have sold every seat in the house. That's where we are, and that's where we're likely to stay for the duration. In a long period of nostalgia for what was, and a hunt for what went wrong to the point that somehow we threw it all away for no good reason. He says for a lot of us today, the only question is, how far do we have to go back in history to find clarity over matters concerning practically everything from art to science to health? I mean, are we talking the 1980s? Are we talking the 1880s? Whatever the stopping point is, we're looking for a better way than the one dreamed up for us by the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, and the new and not improved Disney Corporation. Amen. Well said. Beautifully said. So to illustrate some of the decisions that we're facing, and I'm saying this from the standpoint of, I'm not calling people, hey, you're not mad enough at the alphabet crowd, or you're not, showing enough displeasure and protesting enough against, drag queen story hour or whatever. I'm just saying the woke mind virus has managed to thread its way into so many institutions that avoiding it is really not an option. You send your kids to government school, it's going to be there. You send them to the library, it's very likely it's going to be there. Within the corporate structures, it's still there. Not as popular as it was, this time last year, but it's still there. I want to give you an example. This is a video clip of a young mother from Virginia, and she is describing the decision that she is having to consider as her family is facing putting their kids in school. Her first child is about to reach school age. Listen to what she has to say.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Weichbrot. I'm a mom of 2 in Fairfax County. This is my oldest. And my husband and I have a difficult decision to make this fall as he is approaching preschool age, and we are faced with the decision of whether or not we are going to put our child in public school system where Fairfax County has decided to move forward with instituting gender studies in elementary school. Despite having done a study group, a focus group in the community to see if parents even wanted this. And when parents said no, the board voted 16-0 and said we're moving forward anyways. This shows clearly that they see parents not as partners, but as an obstacle for their agenda. And I have a really hard time looking at him and going, here, I'm just going to give you over to people who do not want to partner with me in how you're going to be raised. School and education is a huge part of a child's life. And early childhood is supposed to be filled with exploration and creativity and fun, not debating issues that are for adults to handle. These kinds of topics should be introduced sensitively and by parents who are raising their children with their values, not with an ideology passed down from the top.
Isn't that just spot on accurate? And I don't know that she could have said it any better, but that really is the choice before us. And, for many of us, it's our grandkids that we're worried about. Do you really want to send your grandkids off to that? And this is going to sound a little bit subversive, but I got to throw it out there. What kind of a world do you want your kids and grandkids to inherit? Are you going to sit back while people force feed them untruth, lies, and anti-reality, and expect that they play along with it like a good little citizen, they don't question anything? Or do you want to raise kids who can actually stand up for themselves, who are on the side of truth, even if that truth is not what's popular? Now, this doesn't mean we force feed and indoctrinate them. It just means we help them see the difference. This is one of the places where my deepest admiration goes out to my friend Connor Boyack for his Tuttle Twins series of kids' books. By the way, it's not just kids who benefit from these books. Adults will get their minds around great economic truth as well as political truths regarding freedom and the proper role of government. But the idea, and I think Connor is dead on accurate for going after it this way, is to teach kids as early as possible sound principles, so that when they are introduced to unsound, or for that matter, just flat out insane principles, they have the wherewithal to go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, and can question it and suss it out for themselves. I know the proudest moments of my life as a dad have been when my kids were able to pick on someone trying to feed them a line of crap, and they recognized it. And that doesn't mean that they automatically told their teacher, hey, you shut up, you're not telling the truth. I've told them, be polite, treat others the way you want to be treated, but at the same time, It's okay to recognize that that's not the truth that's being told here. And by the way, here's another example. This is PBS. They have a new educational show. This is for kids ages 3 to 8. Just to give you a little sample of what this program, it airs, this actually aired on April 1st of 2021. But this is for kids 3 to 8 years old. Let's learn. Well, what kind of education are we giving them? Here, listen in.
So, get your singing voices ready. And we're going to start with our hips. The hips on the drag queen go swish, 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 swish. The shoulders on the drag queen go shimmy, 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 shimmy. Blah, 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 blah.
And, you can't see the video component here, but it's hideously a guy in woman face, made up to the extreme, but this is being programmed at kids with our tax dollars, no less. This is a PBS production, or at least it was. I'm thinking the Trump administration may have put a dent in this kind of indoctrination. Does it not make you feel just a little bit uneasy? Okay, my goal isn't to make you angry. It's just to point out this is the reality of what we're up against. And just politely, well, I guess that's not something I want to acknowledge, or I'll just try to avoid it. It cannot be avoided. At some point, you're going to have to make a choice. And the sooner you make that choice, the more firmly you can plant your feet on solid ground and not yield an inch to the people who would try to either indoctrinate you or your kids or your grandkids into participating in their lies. I'm just, I'm thinking back just a few years ago, 10 years ago. If you had suggested, oh yeah, PBS, one day they'll have some guy dressed like a woman out there talking about his hips going swish, 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 and, just all things rainbow for the kids, I would have said, oh, come on, I think you're being a little bit dramatic there, don't you think? Was this a slippery slope argument? There is no slippery slope. It's a flat-out cliff. And a shocking number of people who should have known better have just plunged headlong over that cliff with the rest of the lemmings. Yeah, you're going to look crazy to them as you're fighting your way back against the crowd that's running toward the edge of that cliff. But what matters in the end? If good character, solid virtues, an abundance of ability to recognize and to correspond and to shape your life according to reality. In fact, this leads me to my final article that I want to share with you, and this is from J.B. Shurk from American Thinker. I am a big believer in the idea that the most important thing that any of us can be doing right now at the individual level is becoming the best version of ourselves possible. And I mean this in the most well-rounded way, physically, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally. We need to be high-performing people. Financially, we need to be squared away and examples of excellence in everything that we do so that even our worst opponents cannot deny that whatever it is we're doing, it's working. They can still hate us, they can still disagree with us, but they can't deny that this is a person of character. J.B. Shurk talks about this pernicious belief that we have allowed to creep into our society today that is that only specialists can tackle complex problems. He calls that a pernicious belief. And he says, strange as it might seem, specialization is a very recent human phenomenon. Smart, capable people in the past didn't limit their studies to particular subjects and avoid novel ideas emerging in unfamiliar fields. Thinkers acquired and applied knowledge wherever they could. And he gives some terrific examples of this. He talks about people like Copernicus, mathematician, Catholic cleric, who not only developed the heliocentric model of the universe, but also formulated the quantity theory of money, linking inflation directly to the amount of money in circulation. He talks about the poetry and the plays of William Shakespeare, which not only establish him as arguably the greatest writer ever to have lived, but also reveal his philosophical sophistication and proficiency in the modern fields of psychology and sociology. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just a master painter, he was also an engineer, a biologist, a physicist, inventor, and military tactician. Now, we call these geniuses polymaths and Renaissance men today because they contributed so much to so many different subject areas. As a critique against the 21st century's obsession with subject matter specialists, maybe Copernicus, Shakespeare, and Da Vinci should also be remembered as accomplished generalists. Can you imagine one of today's tenured experts from the mathematics or economics department of a modern university admonishing Copernicus for having published theoretical ideas well outside of his canon law studies in the Catholic Church? Or a political science or philosophy professor dismissing Shakespeare as just some clever rhymer who is nonetheless out of his depth with regard to international relations and theories of the human mind? Or an engineer or an architect spurning Da Vinci for being a mere portraitist? Of course not. All these academic specialties and every other discipline with a department on a college campus stand on the broad shoulders of the great generalists of the past. By the way, he mentions a few more. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, etc. Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, Oliver Wendell Holmes. What do these guys have in common? They were well-rounded individuals. And I would encourage you to study their lives, study their words, even more importantly, because none of them were exactly, skimping on their ability to write and share what their thoughts were. You want to come face to face with greatness to see what great people are really like? Read their writings. Don't read what somebody else wrote about it. Well, I think Jefferson meant this when he was, advocating for this and, sadly neglecting the trans community in his efforts. No. That's just going to be a bunch of stuff filtered through somebody else's mind. Go to Jefferson's actual writings and correspondence. I promise there's enough there that you'll find incredible nuggets of truth, things that he recognized because he was well-rounded. And it will rub off on you for being exposed to it. And by the way, he's just one example. There's many, many more. Knowledge belongs to anyone who's stubborn enough and courageous enough to hunt it down, and as J.B. Shurk says, it is a hunt. You can't pick up knowledge at the grocery store sitting on the shelf next to 20 varieties of the exact same thing. You have to go out in the world or peer deep inside the farthest reaches of your mind with the vigor of an explorer committed to making a great discovery. No degree bestows genius. Changing the world often requires swallowing a bitter cocktail of gumption, grit, curiosity, creativity, and hard work. Take a good look at those ingredients. And he says, when was the last time you heard a civic leader or a teacher or politician use those words describing what it will take for generations alive today to imagine and build the future? What we hear instead are programmed people delivering ad nauseum the same AI-generated woke scripts: diversity, inclusion, equity, racism, white supremacy, transgenderism, global warming. These words are not ingredients for success. They're not virtues or lofty ambitions or prescriptions for self-reliance. They're scare words imbued with a sense of magic, meant to induce everyone who hears them to obey and to chant the same things. Their code words invoke to pacify inquiring minds and, in turn, to encode everyone in society to behave the same way. But J.B. Shurk says brilliant generalists do not obey, mimic, or behave. They break things. They take existing paradigms and shatter them into 1,000 pieces on the floor. They reimagine the universe without Earth in the center, string together subversive ideas like iambic pentameter pearls, and design mechanical marvels centuries before their time. They rebel against aristocratic central governments and construct political systems in which power originates with the people and in which the protection of an individual's life, liberty, and property remains paramount. They reject the courtly muses of Europe and the suffocating tenets of political correctness, and call for American scholars to free themselves from the cognitive shackles that hobble independent thought. They invent things, they build things, they dream, question, fail, and try again. They risk everything. In short, they do. So what does it say about our society that most artists, academics, writers, and reporters all believe or tend to believe pretty much the same things? What does it say about our universities that most professors are creatures of the socialist left? that speech codes are enforced, safe spaces monitored for protection, and that politically incorrect thoughts are denigrated? What does it say about our scientists that they defend their opinions with religious fervor and censor opposing points of view? What does it say about our white-collared professionals and government bureaucrats that they ridicule public dissent as disinformation or misinformation and justify their own policies as products of unimpeachable expertise? Well, J.B. Shurk says all these pathologies suggest that our society is riddled by tyranny and groupthink. He says ours is a world where experts repeat falsehoods and regular people are expected to treat those falsehoods as magical truths. Obedience has displaced originality. Mimicry has supplanted imagination. And he says to free ourselves, we must think for ourselves. If you're one of those people, here's a tip of the hat to you for doing so. Check out my show notes for today, March 26th, 2025. You'll find them at thebryanhydeshow.com.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.